Welcome to the Robotics Through Science Fiction podcast. I'm Robin Murphy, and let's talk about robots in the time of pandemics. For my day job, I've been working on robots for the latest disaster, which is COVID. And I started doing infectious diseases and disaster robotics in 2015 for the Ebola outbreak. And you can check out some findings at the roboticsforinfectiousdiseases.org website. So in the meantime, I've been exploring pandemics in science fiction, particularly robot science fiction and pandemics, and with a big shout out to technology.com and its really nice index database. The result is my article for Science Robotics on Science Fiction and Pandemics, and that'll be available on May 13th, and we'll post it to the RTS website as soon as we can. Now, you'd have thought that science fiction, right? It's rife with aliens, nuclear wars, ecological disasters. It have a lot of stories about pandemics where robots were brought in to help. I mean, after all, robots for medicine have been around since Ian Forster's 1909 story, The Machine Stops, and Paul's 1928 story, The Psychophonic Nurse. But no, there wasn't anything I could find with robots being used for a biological outbreak until 1969. And that was the Andromeda strain, 1971 for the movie. And there, robots, robot Waldos, were props, which were as part of the realism, not actually like lead stars in the story. The only fiction that I found where robots get a starring role during an epidemic is Annalee Newlitz's 2018 award-winning story, When Robot and Crow Saved East St. Louis. No, it's not Crow T Robot from Mystery Science Theater 3000. It's Robot and a Crow and how they saved East St. Louis. The story is describing an autonomous surveillance drone that detects an emerging outbreak in a tenement in time to prevent an epidemic. It's a great story. Packs quite a bit of wallop about the social science of infection diseases as well as the technology. The story's free on Slate. Now, could a drone detect people who are infected with the disease? It's not clear. There are a lot of groups that are claiming they can, but I and no one I know in public health, and I'm happy to be corrected, has seen any evidence. Thermal imaging, even with a person standing still and an optimal distance from the camera, wasn't reliable for SARS or MERS, so we're not really optimistic about its chances from a drone hovering above a person and hopefully a safe distance away because, let's face it, drones are flying weed whackers. Detecting coughs with drones, also problematic. I've been working on noise reduction of microphones on drones for two-way communication through a drone between rescuers and, say, an injured hiker. It's a really, really hard problem to hear. You got to hear over the rotors. I mean, at this point, you're talking about the human sound is actually noise to the dominant signal of the rotors. And then we've got a lot of issues with privacy when we think about coughing and tracking people are coughing and have a thermal or running slightly hot. Ugh, tough one. Now, fortunately for us science fiction lovers, while robots don't get to be the stars very often, teleoperated robots do get to be the solution to continuity of work and quality of life to victims of a pandemic. And that would be the Lock-In and Head-On books by John Scalzi. 1% of the world's population totally paralyzed by virus, and now they work through brain-machine interfaces to control humanoid robots. The robots are referred to as threeps because they resemble C-3PO. If you haven't read Scalzi, please start reading him now. He combines humor and insight and action and compassion into entertaining and touching narratives. And boy, don't we deserve that in these fraught days, don't we? Robots aren't funny, but they are amazing in Daniel H. Wilson's The Andromeda Evolution. It's the authorized sequel to the Andromeda strain, and it is excellent. Lots of robots are used in very realistic ways, which is to be expected since Wilson has a PhD in robotics. There have been some negative reviews, which are mostly either complaining, how dare he touch the sacred original of the Andromeda strain? Yeah, whatever. Or the characters are flat. Yeah, like Crichton wrote deep character studies when he was alive? Really? Anyway, you can see my review of the Andromeda evolution and its teachable moments about brain-machine interfaces on our website. So there's not a lot out there on robots helping with pandemics. But what is there, it's worth reading. When Robot and Crow Saves East St. Louis is a pretty good story for kids too, so keep that in mind. If you get a chance, read The Machine Stops. You can find it on the internet, and I have a link to it on our website. It's old and kind of stilted, but it's still a very prescient look at our sort of shelter-in-place lifestyle, very similar to what we're living in now. You've got an elderly woman who's a top academic, happily giving virtual talks throughout the world and having a rich virtual social life without leaving her apartment. But at some point, the machine infrastructure allowing everyone to live very physically isolated lives, it breaks, and she has to depend on her son to help her leave her home and return to a more primitive way of life. So I'm being real nice to my son. Well, pandemics, all I can say is stay healthy and sane. And if you haven't subscribed to our newsletter and our YouTube channel, please do so you won't miss a thing.